Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 126 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. So I had such a great discussion with Kelsey Chiddick for this episode. And Kelsey is a widowed parent, and in this episode she reflects on losing her husband very suddenly. He actually died in front of their kids at a trampoline park when she was out of the country. So be sure to listen for the part where she shares the most valuable lessons she learned about raising grieving kids, that she didn't have to try to fix everything for her kids, but instead she needed to be there and to listen. Before we jump into my discussion with Kelsey, I wanted to let you guys know some updates from here. So first of all, for listeners who are in Western Washington, and especially in the Seattle to Bellingham area, please join me at Village Books in Bellingham on Sunday, November 6th at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I will be there with Josh Clements, the executive director of the grief center, Our Treehouse, which is located in Bellingham. And we'll be talking about grief and children's grief, and we will also be joined by Sherry Puzzi of Moms Don't Have Time to Grieve, and she'll be recommending some other grief books in addition to mine that readers I'm sure will find interesting and helpful. And stay tuned because November is Children's Grief Awareness Month, and I'm going to have an exciting announcement, so be sure to follow me on Instagram or your favorite social channel. You can find me at LiskJenny on all the channels. And speaking of Children's Grief Awareness Month, I have a giveaway going on for 100 copies of Future Widow for Kindle, and it's going on over at Goodreads, so you can get to that at jennylisk.com/Goodreads. Will take you, actually that redirects right to their site, right to the page where you can, I think it's a 1 or 2 click entry if you're signed into Goodreads. And again, I'm giving away 100 copies of the ebook of Future Widow, and that ends on November 17th. So please be sure and pop over there today and enter that and share it with your friends too. Okay, so that's all the news from here. Let's get on with the show. Support for this podcast comes from BetterHelp. You can talk with a licensed professional therapist online, anytime, anywhere. Visit betterhelp.com/widowedparent to learn more and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/widowedparent. I hope you'll check it out. My guest today is Kelsey Chiddick. Kelsey is a writer, comedian, and inspirational speaker. Over the past 14 years, she's performed stand-up comedy all over Los Angeles and speaks at events around the country. She is the author of the bestseller, Second Half, Surviving Loss and Finding Magic in the Missing. Her book is about the sudden death of her husband in 2017 and her journey back to joy. She is also the host of the Moms Don't Have Time to Grieve podcast, which explores the beautiful and hard ways we walk through grief, and the co-creator of Keep On, an inspiring and humorous podcast that explores how our greatest obstacles turn out to be our greatest gifts. Kelsey is joining us today from Los Angeles. Kelsey, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Nice to meet you, Jenny.
Yeah, nice to meet you too. I've been looking forward to speaking with you. I interviewed Zibby Owens maybe a month or 2 back on the show. And so I'll refer listeners to that if they didn't catch that one yet, about her grief experience and her new book that's out. And as we were talking, she said, "Have you interviewed Kelsey yet? You have to talk to Kelsey." And of course, I mentioned in the intro that you host the Moms Don't Have Time to Grieve podcast, which is part of Zibby's network of podcasts and content, I guess you'd say. So there's so many ties here. It's just terrific. And it's great to finally meet you.
Yes, I feel the same way. I love talking to people about this stuff, but in light and new ways. It's not the podcast either of us wanted to be hosting or being on, on our vision board 20 years ago, but here we are.
Exactly. I didn't even have a vision board 20 years ago.
True. I think I did it when Oprah told me to, like 15 years ago. It did not have this story on it. That must have been I didn't pull those out of a magazine and tape anything about this on there.
Yeah, you had to throw out that vision board and probably start all over again, huh?
Start fresh. And there's some good stuff on it, so that we're okay. But thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's start out here. So your book, like I said, is called Second Half, which of course is, I think, a reference to football as well as your life. So we'll get into that. But I wanted to start out with the very first sentence here. I had 12 grief books on my nightstand, 7 lasagnas in my refrigerator, 2 sobbing kids, and 1 dead husband. I think a lot of my listeners can relate.
Yeah.
I mean, I read that and I thought, okay, wow, she's pulling me in. What's her story about? So let's back up. Before your husband died, tell us about your family, your life, kind of what was normal.
Sure. I grew up in a little town in Florida, Winter Park, Florida. Wonderful life. Lakes and friends and family. And I was a swimmer. I had
a champion swimmer, I believe.
A champion's pushing it, but yes, I did I got a scholarship to University of North Carolina through that, which was awesome. But I had a really good life. I grew up in a town that was mostly Christian and Southern, but I grew up in a Buddhist, kind of open-minded spiritual family that had very different views on life and death. And we all got to go to different churches, and I would be friends with my Christian friends and go to Fun in the Sun, SON, and then I'd go with my best friend who was Jewish, and then my family went to a very non-denominational church. But we grew up talking about big things and hard things. But in between all that, life was really good. Winter Park is a pretty, is a fairly affluent town. My father was a lawyer, and life was good. I just remember thinking like, gosh, we're just super, super lucky. That kind of was the narrative around our house always, like, be grateful. We have, some people have really hard lives. Some people have people that die. Some people get sick. And I was like, God, I just like, that's not us. Like, how did I luck out? I just remember feeling that way. I went to University of North Carolina on a swimming scholarship. And my sophomore year, I met a very big 6'5", 300-pound defensive lineman from Allentown, Pennsylvania, pretty much as opposite of the type of guy I had dated or was interested in. He came from a family. His father was a minister at Harvard. His mother was a professor at Holy Cross, very academic, very poor. And I met this guy one night, and he was just a real meathead, but he had a heart of gold. I mean, he was just different than any human being I'd ever met, and deeply spiritual, deeply interested in reading and asking questions about why are we here? What is this about? What are we supposed to do here? How do we leave this place better? How do we connect human beings to each other? How do we love each other better? And we were 19 and 21. When I met him, my parents were going through a divorce. My brother was going through some stuff with addiction, and we just fell in love right away. It was not what I expected. And I pretty much from the day I met him, I knew this was the person I was going to spend my life with. And so we met when I was 19. We were engaged at the World Trade Center. We lived in New York up there. He played for the Giants for a little bit. He was a football player and ended up going on to play in the NFL and won a Super Bowl. But we got engaged at the World Trade Center in 2002, right before 9/11. And then we got married that next summer, and then lived the next 20 years, as I would imagine, was just like everything I ever hoped. I had a boy and a girl, 2.5 years apart. We lived in this great town in Los Angeles called El Segundo. It's a little community that feels like Iowa, but it's really right inside LA, right by the beach.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's the best town in the world. We are between LAX and an oil refinery. So environmentally, just don't want people to get too excited. It's not perfect. But everything was great. And that's kind of the story up until this next part of my life.
Okay. And by that time, he had stopped playing football, and had switched careers.
Mm-hmm. So he played football for 7 years in the NFL, won a Super Bowl in 1999. And he was never like the best player or made the most. He was always like minimum. It's not what people think. It's just not. He was beat up. His body was really hurting, but it was what he knew how to do. He was a big guy. And so, we were grateful for the sport. We were definitely grateful for all the people that we met, some of the best people I know. But he retired right when we had our son, so 2004. And that transition's really bumpy for any professional athlete because they don't have any skills. At the time, when we went to college, we didn't even have email till our senior year. So technology was just getting started. So when he came out of football, he had no clue what he was going to do. But he went in and got his master's in social work because he came from a very service-oriented family. And then when he realized how much that paid, he decided to become a financial advisor.
Okay.
Like all good football players should. You should have someone that's on the field manage your money. God help us. And life went on.
Okay, and now I'm sensing the other shoe's about to drop. So tell us, so what happened?
So I would say about in 2014, the kids were like, I don't know, 4 and 5 and 7, something like that. And we had everything we wanted. We even had a white picket fence. The gate was broken, which should have been my sign. But we had like what I thought we both had worked for. I was a pharmaceutical rep. I was doing stand up. We lived in this great town. But I had terrible anxiety. And after I became a mother, the anxiety started to kick in more than I remember growing up. But as they got older, in the couple years before Nate died, there was just this real sense of knowing that something was coming. Just an intuition or a deep awareness that pay attention. So a couple of years, starting about 2014, 2015, I went on this spiritual journey, kind of being like, Kelsey, you have everything you've ever wanted in life. Like you have everything, and you are riddled with anxiety. I couldn't put my finger on it. I just knew I needed to get some practices started. I'd always been a walker. I'd always done yoga, but I really started a heavy meditation practice. And Nate and I started reading a lot of spiritual books again, now that our kids were a little older, but we kind of got back to what we had met around, which was just talking about, what is this all about? What are we doing here? And I remember Nate used to always say, like, I don't think I have enough time. And I was like, time? I've got so much damn time. I don't know what to do. Like, God, I feel like these kids have been 4 forever. Like, will we ever be able to, have fun again? And I felt like things were going very slowly. And he felt like life was just flying by. And he's like, I mean, look at them. I already miss them. And I was like, you already miss the kids? Like, I cannot wait for them to go to bed, And so looking back, I think intuitively my soul and his soul were pretty connected. So I feel like sometimes souls maybe begin to transition years and months and weeks prior to when they do. I've just talked to enough people that have dead people that they say there was something that just, if I look back, there was one comment that he made, or there was some feeling or something that I picked up on that I wouldn't know until hindsight. But so I ended up going on this spiritual journey along with Nate and then some of our friends. And through that, I ended up with an opportunity to leave the country to go to Jamaica to this spiritual retreat called A-Fest. And it was this guy that wrote this book that I really liked. And so I went with some friends, but prior to that, I had been just terrified about going. And I just was like, I don't think I can leave. Something bad's going to happen. And long story short, Nate said, listen, you have to go. You have to go on this trip. And I was like, I can't leave the country without my kids. Like, this is insane. Everything feels wrong. And he's like, he never told me what to do. Very quiet, loving man. Big when he was partying, but quiet, loving in the home. And he said, you have to go. You have to go figure out how to be fearless and how to figure out who you are and what gifts you have. And you got to come back and be the person that you were meant to be in this lifetime. I was like, well, that's kind of heavy. But he was very adamant that I would go. And so that takes me to the week of November 11th.
Yeah. So tell us then what happened? How did everything change?
So I went to this retreat, and I remember I got to the Miami airport from LA, and then we were heading on to Jamaica. And I remember thinking, my anxiety's gone. Like, oh my God, like I did it. I'm great. And Nate and I didn't buy the package to like talk because I was so cheap. So we only had texting. And we texted the most beautiful pictures and conversations. I was like, thank you for encouraging me to go figure out who I am. I had just turned 40 that year. So it was kind of like the kids were 9 and 12. I could start to feel myself coming back from momhood. And I was like, I want to switch careers and do something I love. I was working in recruiting, and we had this beautiful conversation over the next 3 days while I was in Jamaica, doing all the things you should do in Jamaica. I was smoking weed. I was dancing, all the things I would never have allowed myself to do. I never was fun my whole life. I was never a partier. I was just enjoying it. And then the last day, I got a phone call from my best friend, and she said, hey, listen, don't do the Kelsey. Don't freak out. but Nate fell. He was at Sky Zone, the trampoline park with the kids. And I remember thinking, like, that man would never get up and take those kids to a morning that I'm not there. He would have slept in. They would have had a big breakfast. But some reason that morning, he said, let's go do something fun before the fun police comes home, meaning me.
The fun police.
The fun police. And so they went, and it turns out that he went with the kids. They checked in, and my son said he remembers that Dad was kind of like, he couldn't figure out the check-in process. So Jack took that over, and then they went up to toddler time with all these kids on the trampoline, and they jumped and they played basketball for about 5 or 10 minutes. And then my daughter said, she was like, Daddy, look at me. And he was like, I love you so much. You're the most beautiful thing in the world, but I need to sit down. I don't feel that well. And then he just died in front of them.
Wow. Right in front of them on the trampoline park.
Right in front of them during toddler time, wearing orange sticky socks, like only my husband would do. So I got the phone call, and then that proceeded to be, the beginning of what was the second half of my life, and our journey. And it's almost been 5 years, which I can't believe, because it feels like an hour and a lifetime.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting phenomenon. I feel the same way, right? Like, was it like just, a year ago, or was it like 20 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So back to, so you're in Jamaica, you get the phone call, and did you find out while you were still in Jamaica that he did die?
So nobody could get to him. So I got the phone call. And my friend said, listen, we don't know anything. We just know the ambulance has come. The paramedics have him. The kids are in a birthday room. Your brother's going to go get the kids and her husband, who was my husband's best friend, and your mom are going to head to UCLA. And I talked to my mom. She's like, don't worry, he's probably dehydrated. I was like, that guy had too many beers last night. Like, I'll kill him, things like that. And when my mom got to the hospital and I talked to her, she's like, they won't let me talk. They won't tell me anything. And I was like, he's dead. And actually, I back up. When my girlfriend called and told me he'd fallen, I said to her, he's dead. And she was like, this is ridiculous. Don't do the Kelsey. But honestly, Jenny, everything in my body knew he was gone.
Wow.
So I kind of was waiting for the call. So I ended up saying, I'm leaving. And everyone's like, don't leave, go on the boat ride. I was like, I was not even speaking. I just packed up. And then on the ride to the airport to try to get a flight home, the ER doctor called. My mom called and said, I've gotten in touch with the doctor. He'd like to share something with you. And he said, I'm so sorry. We've tried everything, but your husband had a massive heart attack. And I said, is he dead? And he said, your husband didn't make it. And I said, I just need to understand, is my husband dead? And he said, Nate is dead. And he was 42.
Wow.
Yeah. Healthiest, most strongest, best person I'd ever known. Yeah.
Right. So he was 42. You were how old?
I had just turned 40.
Okay. And your kids?
9 and 12.
9 and 12. So my kids were 9 and 11, so it's very similar age. Yeah. Oh. So now you're in Jamaica trying to fly back. Your kids are at your friend's house in Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. Your husband is dead. Your mom's at the hospital. Like,
what a shitstorm.
Yeah. I imagine the thought of having to come back and talk to the kids must have been, well, how was that?
So I write this in the book, but it was a really interesting experience, because when we got to the airport, there was only one flight back to the U.S. that night. It was kind of towards the end of the day. And I just knew I had to get back. And I knew I had been lying to the kids as I FaceTimed them, because I couldn't tell them he was gone. And they were like, Mom, it was so scary. Is he going to be okay? And I was like, they don't know, but he's in the right hands. He's with the right people. I try not to outright lie, but I also believe, for parents that are listening, like, you do the best you can. And you say what you need to say. You can always tell them the truth later. You can always ask for forgiveness. You can always explain your intentions. But I think sometimes you have to make a call. And so, I knew I had to get home to them, because I knew he was dead and they didn't know, and I couldn't tell them. And my poor friends and my family was holding this in. And
you wanted to be the one to tell them.
Yeah. And they were, my friends, they were our best friends. And we went to college together, and they were broken, and they're sitting there with my kids, and the kids are going, can I talk to my dad? And, just awful. And so I ended up getting on the last flight on the last seat, and they opened the door for me, which I'd never seen. And I just, for some reason, I find that miraculous, because you see people all the time like running to get into that plane, and they're like, "We're sorry, the gate's shut." But in Jamaica, they were like, "No problem, Mom, you get home." And so they like let me in. And I went into shock, which I've never had. I've never really had anything really, really awful. Even by then, only my grandfather had died, and he was 93, and he died in his sleep at home. No one else in our family had died. We had just had a lot of alive people for a really long time. I'd never been to a funeral. I knew nothing about any of this. So I went into shock, which I would assume, I talk about seeing it like on CSI, like you see those movies where people go insane and you're like, that woman's crazy. That was me on the plane. I couldn't control my physical body. And then this, about 20 minutes in, this beautiful Jamaican woman got up out of her seat, took her seatbelt off. Nobody was talking to me. Everybody was ignoring me, which I would have been too. Like I look like some woman who needed Xanax for the flight. They were like, has anybody got something for her? And she just came up to me and she put her hand on my forehead and she put her hand on my chest and she said, "Baby girl, I don't know what you're going through or what awaits you on the other side of this plane, but I want you to know that so many people are praying for you, and I'm praying for you, and God is with you. And I want you to take some deep breaths, baby girl, and I want you to decide who you want to be when this plane lands." And she said, I want you to take a breath, and I want you to know that you are so loved and you're stronger than you think. And she walked away.
Wow. And you never found out who she was? You never?
No, because at that point they knew what my situation was, so they held the plane for me to get to the next plane when I had a layover somewhere in Texas, which nobody can remember, nor can I, where it was. But her words kind of changed my life. So I think when I got on that second flight, I was listening to meditation music, and then I just was like, well, I mean, I guess I have a decision to make here, because I get to tell my kids I've had time to think about what I'm going to say the story is, and how I used to always say, how we start the day is how we end the day. The stories we tell ourselves are very important. Those were lessons Nate and I always told our kids. So I just knew, like, the way I started this story and the words I chose to describe his death would be the first imprint on their brains. So I spent the next 4 hours on the flight from wherever, Texas, home, deciding what I was going to say to them and how we were going to respond and react as best we could.
So tell us about that. So what did you say to them? How did it go?
So I got home and I landed at LAX. My mom and mother-in-law picked me up. Worst ride ever. Just the massive grief for everybody, right? Just so many people are carrying grief in their own way. My mom was scared because her daughter didn't have a husband and her grandchildren have a dad, and my mother-in-law was stressed because her son was gone. And but I got to the kids, and I remember there was just a real peace. Like, this is game time for you, lady. Like, if you want to talk about like who you are and who you say you're going to be and what your husband would expect from you, like, now's the time. Like, you're not going to walk in there a hot mess, because they're watching you. And they were little enough that I knew I had to make sure the story was clear, that we didn't feel certain things for the rest of our life. So I said, I think I remember the first thing I told them is, your dad wouldn't have left if we weren't going to be okay. It's just not his style. He was the best father in the world. He was the greatest human being I've ever known. There's no possible way he was just going to leave if we weren't going to be okay. And then I told them that, I don't really know what I'm going to do or how to do this. I've been with your dad since I was 19. I don't really know a life without him, but I can promise you this: I'm enough for you guys. I don't want you to have to worry about anything. You are 9 and 12. I want you to keep being 9 and 12, and I'm going to figure this out. Give me a little time, but just know, like, I've got us. So you just need to you just relax. I've got us. And then the last thing I said is, just don't think you're a victim. We are not victims here. We had the best father, and I had the best husband and the best friend for your entire lives and for half of mine. So just remember, whenever you get it twisted, like, we are the lucky ones. We are the lucky ones. I said, some kids don't get that for a day. And then they said, I said, what do you need from me? And I swear, and I have a friend, because I do make up stories sometimes. I said, what do you guys need from me? And they said at the same time, if you're okay, we're okay.
Wow.
And so I was like, well, God damn it, I'm going to be okay in between the misery. And so that's always sort of been my North Star, is just like, come on, Kelsey, Nate believed in love and joy and happiness, and that this life was a gift. Like, keep, in between the great sadness, in between the great pain, keep remembering, like, we're here still. We're still here. Like, how do we honor him? We honor him by crushing our time here. And so that's, whenever I get twisted or feel bad for myself or sorry for myself, I'm just like, nope, he would do anything to be here.
Yeah.
He would be a hot mess if it was reversed, though. I tell him that all the time. Like, you wouldn't have been able to do this, buddy.
I do hear that sometimes widowed dads think that the wrong parent died.
100%. And that's why they get married an hour later. I get it. They're like, I can't do this grocery shopping and the carpool, like, oh, Nate would have been remarried in an hour. He would have been like, I'm going to need some help up in here.
That's too funny. See, this is why you're a comedian.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking back to the conversation you had, and I love the point about the fact that your kids still got to be kids and still needed to be kids.
Yeah.
Right? Because too often I think we hear, and I think it's maybe this is happening less. I think in the past it happened a lot, but the idea like, well, you need to be the man of the house now. You need to take care of your mom now. And one of the things I hear from children's grief experts a lot is you don't want to parentify them too early, and you don't want to put that pressure on them. Your son was 12. It would have been easy for somebody to tell him, you're the man of the house now. Look after your mom.
Yeah. And I think in some ways, intuitively, the oldest child, especially if it's a boy, takes that role to the sibling right away. You start to see, at least I see, older brothers kind of talking to their younger siblings as if they are the ones. And I think that natural kind of change that they do on their own is probably expected, because the hierarchy in the family's changed. I think that's, I see that, and that bothered my daughter a lot, but I wanted to make sure that he knew that he wasn't in charge, mostly of me, because a husband is a partnership with their mother. And so they always saw us as a team. And I know that I didn't want him to have to plug into the spot of my best friend or my husband, or the father. He could plug into, everybody dropped into different roles,
sure,
which is natural. You're not going to be able to stay the way you were when one wheel's gone. You had 4 wheels, now you've got 3. So there's going to be some adjustments. But I wanted to make sure they were adjusting into childhood changes of how they related to each other, not into him becoming, like you said, a parent, or especially my confidant. Or although some days I wanted to be like, I miss him, and he would be like, get out of my room, weirdo, like go date, go find someone. But yeah, it's a tough one, because I think 12 too is I think it's interesting. A lot of people I know have fathers or people that pass at 12, which is really historically and in different societies a real mark. 12 or 13 is a real mark of a boy becoming a man. A lot of the tribal groups, or some of the societies that we look at that aren't in as developed lands, they have these rituals at 12 or 13 where the boys go off and they have pain and they have loss, or they have struggle, or they're off on their own in the wilderness, and then they come back and they're ready to serve differently. So I find it interesting that it was your son. Is your son the 12?
He was 11. Yeah.
He was 11. Yeah. It's a really interesting age, because they're right on the cusp of puberty and kind of making an adjustment. But I would love to run a study on how many fathers die when their sons are between 11 and 14. It's interesting.
Yeah. And how that impacts things compared to if they're like 2 or 5 or 18 or 25 or something.
For sure. It's like the father has gotten to them enough that they know the morals that are expected in the family. They know the rituals. They know enough that their father sat down with them enough in certain relationships that they know what's expected of them.
Mm.
I don't know if that was your experience.
Well, what you said just reminded me that I think your son spoke at your husband's funeral.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that?
Oh my God. That was one of the hardest and best moments. I mean, Jack had never spoke in public at all. And the morning before the memorial, which I didn't even want to do, I was overwhelmed, but I said, Jack, I'm going to talk if you'd like to talk. And I thought he'd say no. And he was like, yes, I would. He went to a coffee shop on sticky notes and he wrote out this speech on sticky notes and he asked me to type it up. And I put it on YouTube because it's so good because it's so 12, but so enlightened. And what he said was everything his father had taught him. And I felt such peace at the end of that because I was like, oh, good. He got to him. He's in him. Like he's in him.
Mm-hmm.
And he started by saying, my father's biggest lesson was, it doesn't matter if you're number one, if there's no other numbers. And the only purpose here is to serve others. And I was like, all right, we're done. Like, it's fine. I was like, wait, did he get to my daughter though? I don't think he got to her. She seems not quite as evolved around that. But at that age, she was only 9.
Sure, sure.
And she was really into me. But yeah, Jack talked, he said, my father taught me how to treat a woman. I'm like, he did? I'm like, when did you guys have that conversation? And he just talked about how much he loved people and how he wanted to carry that on. It was beautiful. And I think that was one of those moments, and we all have some lights along the way where you go, we might just squeak out of this thing without just all having to die.
Mm-hmm. Well, and so, okay, so this reminds me, I'm going to take you back a little bit to actually one of the things I noticed in your book, you said during the first year, I knew if we could find the courage to share our darkest thoughts, we might just be okay.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, because I have read your book, and when we were talking a minute ago, it sounds like when you flew home from Jamaica, and on the second flight, you had plenty of time to think about, okay, what am I going to say to my kids in this awful conversation? How can I make this be, as hopefully helpful as possible, or whatever, less bad.
Right.
And it sounds like you had some really, thoughtful and insightful things to say to them. But it almost sounds like, and then everything was great after that. And I don't think that was the case. So
everything was awful after that.
Yeah. So tell us a little more. Like what did you find the hardest, or how did that first year unfold?
Yeah, I mean, the truth of that conversation was where we were all pointing towards, but it would take years to get there. I think of what we thought about the first week as just a map, and we had a destination. I just didn't know how long. It'd be like driving cross country. I knew I was going from California to Florida, but I had to go through all the other states. But I knew where I was headed. So that kind of kept us on path. But the first 2 years, I would say, were absolutely brutal. There was nothing spiritually evolved about it. There was nothing beautiful. It was just pain. It was just terrible, gut-wrenching physical pain. And I think one of the chapters that when I talk about dark secrets, I mean, I wanted to die. I get confused when I explain it. I didn't really want to kill myself. I wanted to die. I don't know if those two things are separate, but I didn't want to take my life. I wanted the pain. I just wanted the pain to stop. I wasn't looking to leave this world, but I really didn't want to be here with it the way it was now. And my son was the same way. He wanted to go. He didn't want to be here. And my daughter, she just wanted to crawl up inside me and live with me, which is funny because now she's almost 15 and she doesn't want to talk to me. And I'm like, do you remember when you couldn't get enough of me?
Do you think that was like an anxiety type thing?
Oh, she had horrible anxiety. It was terrible. The first few years for her the first few years are the darkest of the dark because the only way I can describe it, and if any of us know that have been there, it's like you're on a planet that you've never been on. You've seen it before in pictures, but you can't, it doesn't fit anymore. You don't know how to walk around it. You don't know what to do. You don't know where to go. You don't know. The whole setup of your life is now shifted in a way that you have no resources or neuropathic memories of how do I live like this? So yeah, the first 2 years were really, really, really dark. I didn't sleep. I ended up, and I don't talk about this much, but I just touch on it. I ended up getting a diagnosis I didn't want about 2.5 years into it because I think I was so scared. Like I was so scared and sick and tight. And COVID hit too, a couple, like 2.5 years after. And my body just, I could, the stress of trying to figure out how to do this and raise these kids was brutal.
Mm. Well, that reminds me, you talk about having to learn how to not try to fix things for them, but just to listen. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's probably been the best thing that I learned. I mean, the first couple of years, I would always just say the things I said that first night, like he was the best, we were lucky, and they were like, "Would you please, like, enough of this, like, happy go lucky." And I would just try to make it better. I would try to do all the counseling and do all the therapy and make sure that I was being the best mom and giving the best advice and, trying to keep friends around and do everything. And then at some point, I realized that I wasn't listening to them. They deeply missed their father, and their experience was theirs. And they were different ages and different people and had different relationships with them. And so my father-in-law, who's a minister, but also studies Buddhism, was like, "You're not responsible for saving everybody." And he just kept saying that your mantra is, "I am not responsible. I'm not responsible for their happiness. I'm not responsible for carrying this family on my back. I'm not responsible for him dying. I'm not responsible for any of it. I will do the best I can, but I can't fix everything." So when I started to just let my kids say and do and feel the things they wanted and watched it more like a wave, it got a lot better because I stopped having to have all the answers. It's exhausting to be making stuff up that you don't believe. Like, we're going to be okay, when you're like, I don't think we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
And so the kids, what I found grief-wise is when I would let them say, "I hate this, I hate him, our life sucks, we're never going to be happy again, this is the worst, I don't want to live," I would just say, I hear you. I'm so sorry you're hurting. That must be so hard. I love you so much. I hear you. Oh, yeah, I bet that's awful.
So how did that go then?
They would be like, "I feel better, thanks." And I was like, what?
You're like, wait, I just spent the last year trying to convince you and fix things.
Yeah,
and all I had to do was listen.
Yeah, right. And I think what I think I would, and I have no advice for anyone, honestly, just swim. But I do think you have an idea of where you want to go. And then you let go of how you get there and let people get there the way they need to get there. So I do believe that we all have to decide, am I going to make this, am I going to be somebody 20 years from now that's still talking about my dead husband in a sad way? No, I'm not. I will hopefully remember it like a dream. But I know that during those 20 years, there's going to be a lot of work and pain and hardship. But I know where I'm headed, which is to a life that I'm going to love as much as I loved the one with him. I have no clue how I'm going to get there. I have no clue what I'm going to need, but I do know that's where I'm headed. And I feel that way with the kids. I wanted to be real clear where we were headed, and we weren't going to start telling stories that would then get stuck in our minds, like that we got screwed. Because we didn't. Unless we decide that was like, we don't know how long he was going to live. We didn't know if he was going to be sick if he was around. We didn't know what it would be like to have a dad that's really sick around for 20 years. So for us to make up a story about what's bad is the same as making up a story of what could be good. So let's just choose good. Because they're both made up.
Right.
We don't know. We don't know how it would have gone. So let's just choose the story that feels better.
I wonder if you can tell us about a trip you took to the dollar store to buy ceramic plates.
Oh, yeah. I had seen in some ad, there has this thing in LA called the Rage Room. And it's probably for like angsty 20-year-olds or something. I don't know. And you go and you pay like $100 and you just break crap. Like you just throw, they just give you things to crash and throw, like a construction site. And the kids were so angry. I mean, they were so angry that he was dead. It's embarrassing to have a dead dad when you're 9 and 12. You want to have an alive dad.
Yeah.
You want a dad at the sports. You don't want to have people look at you and be sad. It's embarrassing.
Right.
It's embarrassing as a wife. You just don't want to be the person that has the thing. And so they were mad. So we used to do a lot of like running around the neighborhood in the middle of the night, like with trying to touch our feet on the ground and just get grounded. But I could tell they were sad, but they were also really mad. And so when I read that, and they were in a mood that morning, they were just like, they hated everybody. They hated me. They hated their life. And it was like a Saturday where you're supposed to do stuff with your dad. So I was like, listen, let's just go to the dollar store. You guys each get $20. You can buy $15. You have to buy $15 worth of things that are breakable, and then you can spend $5 on whatever you want. And they were thrilled, as you can imagine, as kids are at that age, to buy things.
Uh-huh.
And they were like, so we got home, and they said, what are we going to do with all these plates and these glasses? I said, we're going to break them. And they were like, what? And the joy on their face. And I said, not only are we're going to break them, but we are going to cuss like sailors. I'm talking the F word. Every word you want to say, every word you've never been allowed to say, anything. I want you to scream it and break those. So we all got on this concrete slab by our trash cans, and we just threw them and cussed. And the cussing was a real gift for them. It's really interesting to let kids kind of go in a safe way. By the end, we were dying of laughter. Everybody was so happy. The place was a mess. They couldn't believe we'd done this. And it was like something big had moved out of them. And that's probably the first time I realized letting kids rage is really important with grief.
I'm curious if the neighbors
they were cheering
this.
us on.
Oh, okay.
They were just like, get it, girl. Yeah. I mean, they got it. They understood.
Yeah.
And, anger and sadness are pretty close to each other. I go to sadness more often. It just depends on your personality. I don't get angry very much about it. I get really, really sad. My daughter gets really, really mad. And if you're not matching with a child, it's hard, because I'm like, why are you so mad? She rages, but that's her. And then she's like, why are you so depressed? So it's kind of understanding everyone says this, we all grieve differently. But when you're a parent shepherding someone through loss, it's sometimes easier when you have a kid that mirrors you. And so you really have to work hard to be conscious. Like, the other kid doesn't do that, or the kid doesn't process the way we do. So I've learned a ton, and I'm better. I still have a lot of work to do. My kids would tell you miles of work.
Oh boy. And you're approaching 5 years, I think.
Yep. I'll be 5 years this November.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which feels like a milestone.
Yeah. I think we could keep talking about this all day. I have a few more questions.
Sure.
We probably can't. This would be, I don't know. This could be like a 3-hour discussion.
Yes.
If we wanted it to be. But
we'll do a part 2.
Yeah, maybe so. Well, one of the things you mentioned, shifting gears a little bit here, in the book, you said, I don't just want to come to terms with Nate's death. I want to find a way to come to terms with all deaths, including my own and that of my children. And I'm wondering, what do you think that being a young widow has taught you about death and grief and loss?
It was my worst nightmare. Always had been my whole life, that I would lose somebody I loved. I've always been anxious and fear-based. The loss of Nate, followed by my medical diagnosis that's totally fine now, but it took me to the places I never wanted to go to, that I had to make a choice. I could either worry about this for the rest of my life, or I could just not. I could just not. I could just watch that neural pathway, and I could just, over time, decide I'm not going to walk down it anymore, and eventually it'll get grown over. I have walked that path of being afraid of somebody dying, my kids getting hurt, someone getting in a car crash, me getting a sickness. Everything I've worried about happening has happened. And here I am, more joyful, more present, more excited about life and sex with random people and whatever I get to do that I never thought I could do, that this life path put me on, that I just refuse to waste any more time with that tight feeling, because I've been through too much and survived too much. So I also, I think I've done a couple mushroom journeys for healing, for grief, and I really was able to connect to Nate. And death is not, it's not something to be afraid of. I don't think he's gone. I think his body's gone. I think the way I used to communicate with him is gone. But I always tell this example, which I love it. I don't think anyone else gets it as much as I do. But like 100 years ago, if someone went from Florida to California, you could not talk to them the whole way there. You wouldn't know where they were. You would believe they were maybe dead. They were gone because there was no technology that allowed us to speak to them on that journey.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't mean they were gone. It just meant we didn't have the equipment to talk to them on that journey or where they got to.
Mm.
Well, that's how I feel about death a little bit. Like maybe we're just beginning to understand how to connect with people that no longer have a body. Because if we're all made of energy, then we don't go away. Just this version goes away. And most of us have a relationship with some type of God or higher being. And if I feel confident that I can pray to God, I should feel confident that I can talk to Nate.
Mm.
I can't see God. There's no proof of it. There's no proof, proof that everybody agrees on exactly. So I've really gotten to the point where it's got to be a transformation. I mean, we call it death because it's the death of that version, but I refuse to do life without Nate. I talk to him all the time. I get mad. I get happy. I can feel him. I can hear him. Sometimes he goes away. Sometimes he shows. I think I dreamt about him last night, which is rare. But when I do, it's like I remember in the night and I'm like, hold on to it. And then I forget. And I'm so mad because I didn't write it down or something. But these people would not have left us without, they don't leave. They just, this is the thing. I don't have the answers to it, but I refuse to believe he's gone. So death to me now, I've had to come to terms, like if something happened to me, my kids will be okay because they're okay without their dad. Like, and I have to start to believe that way so I can live. If not, I'm just riddled with anxiety.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I just try to go down that pathway that says like, all is well. You're stronger than you think. This thing is way bigger than you can imagine. Don't get stuck on a pathway that doesn't make you feel good. And I do think you can retrain your brain through meditation and through just awareness. It doesn't mean I don't have those moments. They just don't own me anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, tell us about your podcast, Moms Don't Have Time to Grieve. What's that all about?
That's it. It's just about people that have a dead person. It's just, I'm trying to look at grief a little bit differently. There's a ton of podcasts about grief. And I believe all the things that most of us say, everybody can grieve differently. You can be as sad as long as you want. All of it I agree with. And I want this podcast to be a little bit more about what are the gifts of grief? What are the things that what parts of it does it change you for the better? How does it make your life richer or more present or grateful? What paths has it put you on that changed you? What has that pain done to just challenge every belief you've ever had? Because I was really lucky for 40 years, but I was scared, anxious, and there was very little depth. Now I've been through a lot. I'm not scared. I'm not anxious. There's a lot of depth. I don't know which one's better or worse.
Yeah.
Just don't like saying death is bad. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like anyone to say like, well, he should have been here, or that's not fair, or no one ever said it was fair, and we don't know if he should have been here or not. We just don't know. And I struggle having people who have lost children on the podcast because I haven't experienced that. And I think that's probably a different ball game, but I still stand behind the sense that our souls are here for when they're here, and they all have to go different ways for different reasons that we just don't know. So to make up a story that it's bad, that's a choice.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sad, it's always sad. It's always hard.
Right.
Bad is the one that gets me. So that's what the podcast is, kind of working our way away from having this idea that everyone should die at 84 and easily sleep in their bed. Some people die in car accidents. Some people get sick. Some people die at Sky Zone. Some people live 4 days. Some people have babies that are only here 2 years. Whatever it is, like, just because it's painful and sad doesn't mean it's bad. Birth is painful, very painful, but nobody feels bad for you.
Yeah.
So,
gosh, this has been such a great discussion. Thanks. I have one wrap-up question, if you don't mind. I like to ask all my guests, if you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would you say to them?
Hang on. Just hang on. You're enough. You're enough. You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be where you are if you weren't meant to be there. No matter what your story is, you cannot convince me that you don't have this, because you do, if you so choose. I believe when someone dies, angels surround the people that are left, and there is so much help. You just have to pay attention and get ready to transform and get ready to find hidden gifts and just hang on. Just don't give up. It gets better. I hate that, but boy, God, time really does make it better. I want to punch people in the face when they'd say that, but time heals most of the time if you so choose to allow it.
Well, thank you. I think that's a great place to end. So my guest today is Kelsey Chiddick, author of Second Half and host of the Moms Don't Have Time to Grieve podcast. So Kelsey, where can listeners find you, find your book, find your podcast, all that good stuff?
Yep. Podcast is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those places where podcasts are. The book is on Amazon, Second Half by Kelsey Chiddick, or you can go to secondhalfbook.com. But Amazon is probably the best place for it at this time.
Mm-hmm. Terrific. All right. Well, Kelsey, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Kelsey Chiddick as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 126. And if you're finding the Widowed Parent Podcast helpful, please consider supporting the show. It's easy. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. That's buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. As always, thank you for listening. And until next week, remember, you've got this.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.